this is the model that we usually talk about in the tech world. This is a chart that I recreated from what I saw 20 years in talking in tech. There's a few different stages of funding. The one that upsets the entrepreneurs the most is the seed round. So and VCs used to be there in that space, and then they left, and so there's a hole left in the market. And that hole is either called the pioneer gap, or when we want to be a little bit less happy about it, we call it the valley of death. And it's the valley of death because there are so many companies that are over here in the pre-seed space, so many companies that have a decent idea. Sometimes they have friends and family money. Sometimes they get to a customer or so in that space, but then they need some money to get real, right? Get to scale. And there isn't enough money in any city except San Francisco for that. So a lot of companies just die because they can't get funding. And so we call that the valley of death. There's a gap for them to jump over. And then if they can get to the other side, if they do get funding from angels or crowdfunding or accelerators or whatnot, and they can find some customers, they can start to grow. And then the VCs show up to fund them in that growth stage. And then all goodness happens at the exit, of course. Okay, when we look at SMEs, when we look at small and medium enterprises, which, by the way, SMEs is a derogatory term in the VC world. Not in my world. In my world, they're great. But over here, I'm over on the West Coast of the US. SMEs is a bad term. It's like, no, we don't touch them. They're not big enough. All right, well, we'll just ignore that the rest of the day. So just to flip between these two graphs, what's different? Well, what's different is that this gap is bigger. It may not physically be more money, but there's a step up between having an idea and having enough money to actually make it happen. And especially out in emerging markets, and especially in my work in Africa, this is just an enormous sum of money that they just can't afford to find anywhere. There's no friends and family money to fill this in general. This is usually where a grant can make a huge difference, or a little check from an accelerator. There really isn't crowdfunding yet in any scale, and it's too big for almost everyone. And so what you find is tens of thousands of companies, and I'll show you how to find them in a few minutes, tens of thousands of companies that want to get through this gap, and no one's funding them. So how big is this gap? Yeah, it varies from place to place. So the poorer the country, the smaller the actual dollar values. So when I visited Malawi, if I had handed out $5,000 checks, in 10 checks I could have funded 10 companies. In $50,000 I could have funded 10 companies and got them through that gap and off and running. And when I go to a slightly higher, richer country, it might be $10,000. And in Nigeria, the behemoth of the continent, it might be $50K. There's plenty of companies where $50K is more than they need. And then in general, the biggest opportunities may be a few $100,000, but not $500,000. $1 million is too much, right? I've personally signed many $100,000 contracts to fill in this gap. So where do you find them, right? Where are these companies hiding, right? And they're not hiding. They're looking for us, the investors. So here's a screenshot. Simple example. Here's a screenshot from the Land Accelerator Africa. I just took this today. We had over 1,400 companies apply to this program this year. This is not the Land Accelerator Africa Forever. This is just 2022. And this program only serves companies that work in restorative forestry and restorative agriculture. And I looked at every single one of these applications, and there were maybe 20 that didn't fit that. There were 2 from India, 1 from France, and then there were a handful that weren't in restorative anything. But there were 1,400 companies that did fit. And they all were searching for help, and they were all searching for money. And if we had, call it $5,000 times 1,400 companies, we could fill in the missing middle for all these companies. Of course, we didn't have that much money because that much money is not even flowing into Africa. But we helped 100 companies out of this group, and not with cash, but with help. And we'll give some of them some cash later. Where else? Well, over at TerraMatch, we ran a program last year where we asked for applicants, and we had 2,000 other companies come through. There's some overlap between the two. because these are both restorative forestry and agriculture. And then across the whole pledge network, across my last decade of work, there's tens of thousands of companies. What I learned in doing this over the years is I really don't, no matter how focused you are, no matter how tight a space you're in, whatever your personal impact is, there are hundreds of companies or thousands of companies or tens of thousands that are looking for you in terms of funding and help. That number just keeps going up. So every year there's more accelerators, but every year there are more entrepreneurs searching for help. And I've seen that again for 10 years. My first program in Seattle, we had like 60 applicants. My most recent one in 2020 in Seattle, we had 845. At the Land Accelerator, the numbers were like 300, 800, 1,200, 1,400. The numbers just keep going up.